This is the Hard Thing Podcast. Today, we are overcoming average. Welcome back to another episode of the Hard Thing Podcast. This is the podcast that helps you build resilience in your life so that way you can tackle the trials and obstacles in your way, the hard things that are stopping you from being a better you and having a better life. To do that, I take you on a journey with our guests on Mondays through their stories of doing hard things, and then from those stories we extract principles and action items that you can implement in your life so that way you can have a better life and do hard things. I'm your host, Justin Lewis. I'd like to welcome you to the Hard Thing Podcast. Let me tell you about today's guest, but before I do, one quick announcement. On our Thursday show, you can hear me and my co-host Ty Crockett actually talk about challenges that we give to each other. So if you want to see us do some pretty hard things, you can actually go to thehardthingpodcast.com/submit-challenge and submit a challenge to us to see if we do it. And hopefully these challenges are hard and they're pushing us to be more and be better. Again, so go to thehardthingpodcast.com/submit-challenge to submit a challenge to myself and my co-host on Thursdays for our Thursday show, and see how hard we can get pushed. Now, let me tell you about today's guest. I have the wonderful opportunity to talk with Maxwell Ivey. He is known as the Blind Blogger, and we talk a lot about today about his transformation from carnival owner to blogger and coach, and just, you know, Maxwell is probably one of the nicest guys I've ever met. He was super willing to help me with anything I needed. And in the show, he actually talks about being willing and being willing to ask people for help and so forth. He gave me a lot to think about. I would highly encourage you, as we talk, to think about who you might be able to ask for help and who you might be able to help. I think that would be a very valuable train of thought to entertain as you listen up to my conversation with Maxwell Ivey. All right. Well, thank you for being on my show, Maxwell. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you.
Well, thanks, Justin. I'm very excited to talk with you as well. And hopefully we will inspire some people that are watching or listening to take action in their lives today.
Agreed. And hopefully any more hiccups we have don't happen. I know I've already caused a few, so hopefully we can get past that. But Maxwell, I want to start asking the question that I've asked so many people by now. Maxwell, what's the hardest thing you've ever done?
I would think the hardest thing that I've ever done was finally accepting that the family business was done, that I was no longer a carnival owner or part of a carnival family, and that I had to find something else to do with my life, which led to me starting a website where I helped people sell new and used amusement equipment. Because at that time, it was the only thing I felt like I knew enough about to actually do as my next step in life. Now, thankfully, the selling used rides led to blogging and podcasting and writing books and a lot of other things, but it was very hard. And the funny thing was, convincing my family was harder because my mom and my brothers, they continued to have work in the business as independent concessionaires. But I had no reason to be there, so I actually had to convince them, hey, there's no good reason for me to be here. Let me go home and work on my website and do something that I have passion for, that I'm good at, and it could actually lead to something for me down the road.
Wow. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was actually one thing that I really was kind of fascinated about. So your family owned carnivals. I'm curious, how did they get into that in the beginning?
Well, they got into it the way most people get into things. One of the family members started it out of necessity, and then the rest of them did it because the family did it. So my dad used to say the only way you got into the carnival business was by birth or marriage. My grandfather started a carnival in the 50s after him and my grandmother, they had a restaurant in Nebraska in the 30s, and it went out of business. So they did like a lot of America. They did whatever they could to survive until the war was over. And after the war, they worked for people who owned rides, and eventually they bought their own rides and started their own carnival. My dad had a show. We had 7 or 8 rides before he died. We were doing our best to get up to maybe 10 or 12 rides. We would have considered that a good show for us. And I still have family in the business. My uncle, well, he passed away, but my cousin, he owns I'd say a pretty good size, not a large carnival by today's standards, but he has 25, 30 rides. And several of his rides are worth 5 figures, maybe one of them 6 figures. So he's done very well for himself and his kids. And I'm sure his grandkid will be in the business. But yeah, that's how you get into it. And, you get out of it when you don't make enough money to pay your insurance and you can't keep working because if you don't have liability, nobody will let you open.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that darn liability, it's a cause for so many extra expenses in today's industries, right?
Right. And the insurance really started going up after 9/11 because there were so many claims filed against the airline industry. And so the insurance companies, that do the high risk policies, they had to start figuring out, well, where do we recoup the money from? So they raised rates on things like circuses and amusement parks and carnivals. And our rates went up probably 500% between 2001 and 2007. Yeah, when I started the website, they had gone up over 500% over less than 10 years.
Wow.
And as many people know, when you're running a small business, it's very hard to compete against bigger outfits. And a lot of times the insurance providers base their fees upon the mid-level or the high level of people's income as far as what they feel like the market will bear.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then I can imagine that you guys probably weren't the only people who were hit hard by that overarching trend. Like you were saying with small business, I mean, compared to the larger outfits, there's just not many places you can go and grab extra cash from, right?
Right. And a lot of the smaller businesses did go out of business or sold and combined it with larger outfits to the point where now there's a trend, or there was before COVID, of counties purchasing their own amusement equipment so that they'd be sure they could at least have a Ferris wheel and a tilt-a-whirl and maybe a bumper cars for their county fair each year.
Wow. That's really interesting. I never thought about it because, you always think of like the city's yearly festival for celebrating the city and stuff. And all those rides kind of just show up, but you never really figure out the management and the logistics behind it of who owns those and exactly where do they come from,
Yeah. I sold an older Ferris wheel to a fair board in Kansas. And after I sold it to them, I found out that they already owned 9 or 10 rides, but they didn't have any high rides. They were looking for a Ferris wheel or a paratrooper or a rocket-plane. So those are like those lower budget or mid-level high rides. And they're not really high tech, so no big maintenance involved like you'd have with a zipper or a loop-a-plane or a kamikaze or something like. So it's become more common. The other thing that's happened is you're seeing a lot of festivals that depend on inflatables, trackless trains, interactive attractions like rock walls and bungee jumps or trampoline jumps and that sort of thing. So you're seeing more and more of that at festivals because people like me went out of business.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm kind of curious, what lessons have you learned? Because obviously a theme park, carnival, those are primarily service-based businesses. However, you can sell concessions and things like that. What general principles have you learned from working in businesses like that you can give to our audience for kind of applying to their own business?
Okay, this is one of the most important things I will share with y'all today. And it's something that I learned every week in the carnival business. I learned it from my grandmother, from my father. And the idea is that in the carnival business, nobody cares about you. They don't care how you feel. They don't care if you have a generator that's not running quite right or a truck on the side of the road. All they want to know is, can they buy a funnel cake or ride the Ferris wheel on Thursday or Friday night? So you learn from an early age that creative solutions are not just a good thing. They're the only thing. And as my dad used to say, when people would ask him how we got open, he would say, what, did we have a choice? So it really taught me having a positive attitude, finding the good in life when sometimes it was not really easy to find something good to think about, but really just, okay, we're going to find a way to get from Thursday to Monday to Wednesday, just really determination, perseverance, and finding creative solutions. And the really hard thing about finding solutions is a lot of times we find them, but we don't like them. They're not what we want to do. They're not pretty or sexy. Sometimes they're dirty and greasy, or they require a lot of physical effort or a lot of keyboard keystrokes. I had to learn how to hand code HTML to get my website online when I first started with the Midway Marketplace. And trust me, nobody wants to learn how to code HTML. So, really, you just have to ask yourself, what are you willing to do? Other than damaging your health or committing criminal acts, what are you willing to do to get to the next step on the path to your big goal?
Yeah. I think it was Thomas Edison, maybe I'm misquoting, but he has a quote that says something like, most people miss opportunity. No, it was Theodore Roosevelt. He said, most people miss opportunity because when it shows up, it usually is wearing overalls and it looks like work. And,
Can you please send me that when we're through? Because I got to have that quote. That is just perfect. Another one of my favorite quotes is from W.C. Fields, and it goes back to the bad old days of the carnival business. And he said it in a movie once, so it's been accredited to him. He said, "Hey kid, the only way you can lose is to die or quit playing, and you look pretty healthy to me."
Yeah, that is so smart, especially because, you can transpose that same ideology to all sorts of aspects of life. Take finances, for example, especially business, actually. The only way to get out of business is if you run out of money or you die, right? Or you just stop doing the business. So do everything to make sure you don't run out of money, don't die. And then the last choice is, pretty easy. All you got to do is just decide not to quit the business, right?
Yeah. And that's why the hardest thing I ever had to do was to admit that there was no way I could stay in the business. So what do I do next? And that's a really hard decision. It took me 2 years and a health emergency to finally make it. I was almost kicked out of a motel in Port Lavaca, Texas for urinating on the bed linens. And so that, woke me up. I went to a doctor and the doctor said, "Man, you need to address your health or you're not going to be around long." And he said, "I don't mean years, I mean months." So I got with a good doctor. She diagnosed and treated me for sleep apnea. A few years later, I had gastric surgery. And I lost over 250 pounds, and I've gotten healthy, and I've adjusted my lifestyle so I'll be able to stay healthy for the rest of my life, or, give or take, because, some things are not within our control, but pretty much be able to stay healthy for the rest of my life. And, addressing my health gave me the energy and the clarity to just really go all in on this online business. But really having to accept that the business, that there was nothing I could do, that there was nowhere I could get financing to replace what I did have with something that would be profitable. There was just really no answer. And it's a hard thing to accept, but then you have to say, okay, what did this business teach me? What am I good at? What have I learned? And how do I apply that to what I do next? And, I wish I could remember who said it, but there are people who say that, failure is just one step closer to victory. And in my case, I've become healthier physically, but I've also become healthier emotionally. And I found something that was mine that I could have passion for again, like I did back in the old days when you would stay up all night so you could get to the next town and get open, so it's, and you find a way to work 14 hours in those early days of starting a business. And then you're like, man, this is crazy. I can't work this much. I've got to find some people to help me, or I've got to figure out easier ways to do some of this stuff. So, you just apply what you learned from the past mistakes and move on to the future ones. And, it really isn't an exercise where you have to find a way to tell yourself that something is behind you, but you also have to forgive yourself and accept either responsibility if it was your responsibility, or go, look, I did everything right and circumstances just resulted in it wasn't successful. And I think about all the people who have lost businesses or have had to close their businesses during COVID. these people were running great businesses. They were doing everything right. They were employing people. I'm especially thinking of restaurants and bars and hotels and cruise ships and such. I was speaking at a conference in March, and as I was getting off the shuttle from the airport to the hotel, I had a conversation with the shuttle driver about how he was going to have to cancel a future trip of his own because he was worried about his job. And that was in March before we really knew how bad this was going to get. So for those people who have done everything and it still hasn't worked out, don't let that be a reason not to try again in the future. And also, I love these people who are like, okay, I can't work out of my restaurant. Can I work out of my home? So sometimes it involves thinking, okay, the brick and mortar thing ain't working right now. What else can I do to continue the business in some form until circumstances, either mine or out in the world, change to where I can go back to the way I was doing it? And you know what the great thing about COVID is so many people are realizing that their business models were limited, that they weren't taking advantage of all the opportunities that were there. And I think when COVID is over, a lot of people are going to go, hey, we were stupid. And I don't want to offend anybody. I don't want anybody getting me on Twitter and going, Max, you're mean. But I mean, we leave a lot of money on the table as business people because a lot of times we get so wrapped up in the day-to-day stuff that we don't have the time or the energy to think, okay, this is really good, but this isn't good enough. I mean, so I think when we come back, we're going to see a lot more of drive-in and takeout and delivery than we did before COVID, because while it doesn't make them the same money as in-location dining, people are going to be shy to go back to in-person even after vaccines and masks and time. So, if you combine in-person plus more takeout and delivery and drive-up, and more selling your recipes or your products online directly to the consumer, you add all those things together, that bottom line gets a lot bigger. And these are things COVID has been teaching us. So, in a way, for those people who have maintained a positive attitude, COVID is going to show them things. They're going to go, when COVID is over, they're going to go, man, we were really missing the whole picture of the potential of our business.
Yeah. And honestly, if you think about it, like opportunity itself can only show up when there is a void or a lacking. So basically, you can kind of think of it like as a problem, like when there's something that could be there that's not there that people want to be there. And I think part of me thinks that actually one reason why people have been so loath to transition to some of these newer models, like I know my day job before COVID, we were always in office, and then now we are all remote, and we're starting to hire people from all across the US rather than in our state. And so I get this hint that maybe they're thinking about not going back to work, and they're thinking, hey, maybe this is a good idea. And I think that a lot of people kind of act the same way around changing to kind of a new business model, partly because of tradition, like they don't want to step outside of tradition. But I think also part of them, it's a humbling experience to be like, okay, maybe I do need to do this business out of my house. Like I need to literally like hand deliver these products to these people's houses in a way. And I think maybe people are kind of stuck in their traditional ways, but also they're a bit too prideful and they're afraid of being humbled to think outside the box. What do you think?
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. Humility is a very rare trait in entrepreneurs because you really have to have confidence in what you're about to do. I did a podcast a while back. It said, so you're crazy, you want to start a business. So, I mean, you really have to have confidence. And so, that ego, it's difficult to maintain humility and allow the business to humble you occasionally, or even just put yourself back in that mindset. It's difficult. And then of course, tradition is amazing because, I mean, you think about how much money we spent during Christmas and Thanksgiving and New Year's. How many people traveled, even though everybody said, stay home. Mm-hmm. And that was all tradition. We have to do this because we always do this. And so there's a lot of tradition in business owners. There's a lot of ego involved as well. And humility is a rare commodity in entrepreneurs. And I really wish I could teach people how to cultivate humility in themselves, but I don't have a good answer for that part of the question.
Actually, I think you did give a pretty good answer because you said you really have to have a lot of confidence in what you're about. And I think kind of the distinction, if you can like just pick apart that sentence, I think it's very insightful because you said, at least the way I took it, it wasn't so much an entrepreneur needs to be incredibly confident in themselves, but I think the idea is they need to be very confident in kind of the end result, that it can work, that it's useful. And I think when you focus on the end result, you're okay taking those switchbacks up the mountain rather than going straight up the mountain, doing kind of the humble thing and thinking outside the box. So I'd say you answered that pretty well.
Well, I appreciate how you heard my answer because it was better than what it came out of my mind. But I'll take that with me in future conversations. They have to be confident about the product, the service, the value it's going to provide to others, or they can't do it. So that does make it difficult to stay humble.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm fine. I'm sorry. I just appreciate you clarifying that for me. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the insight. One of the things I like about this podcast is in having these conversations, often the guest or I will say something and then the counterpart will pick up on something much bigger and better. And that's one reason why these conversations are awesome because, in having these conversations, I learn by hearing you talk and then, by me clarifying what I learn, you can often learn things and vice versa. And it's just really nice because it's uplifting for both of us, I'd say.
Yeah, I have a good friend, Morris Sweeney, who likes to say that in a friendship, both people should inspire and encourage each other. And then speaking to your last comment there, I have a phrase for my guests because it happens to me often. I will tell my guests, that wasn't what I was asking, but thankfully you just answered a better question than I asked.
Yeah, agreed. It's awesome how often guests say things that are so insightful that you're like, wait, I wish I would have asked the question that would have actually gotten that out of your mouth on purpose, but I'm glad you said that anyways. Kind of going back, I wanted to ask a question back to your heart thing, realizing that it's time to go a different direction. What advice would you give to other people to know the line between deciding it's better to deviate and try a different path strategically, or whether you're just giving up? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I would say the most important thing is ask yourself, does the business or the potential business, does it still give you satisfaction, joy? Do you feel good about doing the work, even if you're not seeing the results you would like to see yet? Do you still have passion? More importantly, do you still have curiosity to find out more about what you're trying to do and make your effort a better project? Because if you personally don't have any emotional investment left, there's an old saying that I learned in my philosophy class in college. They said the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. So if you no longer have strong feelings about what you're doing, then that's the time where you really need to think about pivoting or deviating or changing course, whatever you want to call it. And then once you've made that decision, ask yourself, is there something I can take from what I'm already doing? Can I move into a different market or niche with the same or similar products and services? Can I use the things I learned from this business in the next business? And one of the great examples I have for that is in the carnival business, we often do what are called advanced sale tickets or advanced sale pay one price wristbands. And for the consumer, they get rides cheaper by buying them in advance. The fair committee, they get more money out of you by selling them for you in advance. And you get the knowledge that as long as you get open, you're going to get paid. So everybody benefits from the advanced sale ticket. Well, I've made this offer in my business as an author that if a group wants to hire me as a speaker, but they don't really have the budget for it, if they can sell, say, 20 of my books at the autograph price, then I'll show up, because I know I've already got that much money towards my expenses. So you can do an advanced sale on books or merchandise or or coaching sessions. You can do stuff like that in around a speaking event, even if there's no actual fee for the event. So can you apply things you learned in the previous business in the next business? And if it is time to start over, then go with curiosity. Look into things you've never tried before. See if you can find something else that stirs your imagination, that makes you think, this is cool. I need to learn more about this. And then as you learn more about it, keep those entrepreneurial eyes open for an opportunity where you can turn this new curiosity or passion into an income stream. And I say income stream instead of business because quite often we think about a project having to be a quote business. But to me, a lot of times you just have to think, maybe this new interest, something I'm really starting to fall in love with, maybe there's a way I can generate a little income from it to go along with, my unemployment check or my stimulus check or, my day job. So those are things that I would suggest people think about. And, I know for people that are still working those day jobs, I'm one of these people. I don't advise quitting a day job till you know where the other money is going to come from. But I'm in the minority on that, in that camp.
I agree with you completely on that last point. I think a lot of people kind of shoot themselves in the foot, especially prospective entrepreneurs, when they're like, I'm doing it, I'm cutting, I'm burning my boats, I'm burning my bridges, I'm going out on this entrepreneur. When in all reality, you don't necessarily have to do that. You can scale up, you can create small income streams, use that money to leverage someone else's time in your business and kind of scale it up that way. So I completely agree with you there. And I actually wanted to ask, with the curiosity aspect that you talked about, is that your approach that you took when you did start transitioning from the carnival business to your blog?
I wouldn't have called it that at the time, but when I started, transitioning from carnivals to selling rides, and then again from selling rides to being an author and a podcaster, there were always just so many new things to learn. And I know some people would think, no, there were all these new things you had to learn, new challenges that you had never had anything to do with before. So a lot of it is just mindset, because as I tell people, the difference between junk mail and an opportunity is your attitude when you open your inbox. So I would, so as I was transitioning, I would think, yeah, I've never done it. Man, I hate this HTML, or man, I hate Facebook, or man, why aren't anybody opening my emails? And, why can't I get nobody to sell none of their rides? I'm like, so some people would be depressed, disgusted, disheartened. And they're like, man, this is just hard stuff. I don't want to do this. But to me, it was always, man, this is opportunity. How do I figure this out? Like, for example, with the emails, because when I started selling rides, I was the new guy on the block. There were already maybe a dozen or more online brokerage sites. And the rest of them, they did it for free because they had sponsorship, or they did it on a cost plus basis, which means that if you wanted them to sell a ride that was worth $10,000, they would list it for $20,000 or $30,000, and they would keep whatever the difference was. My model was I wanted a percentage off the top of every sale. So I was the new kid. I had a new business model. People wouldn't open my email. So I finally thought, what can I offer them that's free, that I can do relatively easily, and that will make them at least read my emails or not send me nasty emails telling them not to write them again, which, yes, I did get some of those. So I started finding their information, and I created a text link on my website with their URL, the description of their business, the contact information for them, and I added it to the website, and then I sent them the link, and I said, hey, I just added this on my website to help people find your business. I don't want anything in return for it financially. All I want is for you to agree to receive an email from me no more than once a week. And as a result, I built up an email list with thousands of people all over the world in various aspects of the amusement industry. And I actually need to do some work adding to that list. But, it's just one of those things. How do I do this? Why can't I do this? To me, it was all curiosity. And, the old thing is, especially with a lot of people with disabilities, that don't tell me I can't do that, because all I'm going to do is try to prove you wrong.
Yeah. And I think a lot more people should kind of adopt that mentality. I think we would be a lot farther ahead in the progression of our society if a lot more people were like, oh, you don't think, excuse me, you don't believe in my potential, you don't believe in my capabilities. Well, let's see what you think after I do it, you know?
Yeah. And the thing that really, held me back in the beginning, starting the blog as the blind blogger, was I was reading biographies from some other visually impaired people or people with disabilities who had done things that, seemed bigger and more important than what I was doing. I was like, I'm not an inspiration compared to a guy that's climbed Everest, or, compared to a guy that's got no limbs that surf. These are big dogs. But I finally understood the power of my story, which is that I have a built-in excuse and don't take it. Whereas other people, there's really nothing stopping them from accomplishing their goals. At least they don't have a physical disability. And yet they sleepwalk through their days and they really don't accomplish anything and they don't take risks. And really, there's nothing stopping them. So my story is, Max has an excuse, but he doesn't use it, which is why a lot of people have said over the years, if Max can do it, then what's my excuse? And really, I see these people all the time. Just yesterday, I was introduced to a guy who's a Special Olympian, triple jump champion, a world record holder in that event. Never heard of him before. This guy's totally blind. He set a world record. I mean, and I'm like, I meet these people all the time. I'm like, Max, it's a great thing you have a podcast so you can interview these people because one, you learn from them, and two, you're humbled by them because, they're reminders that there's still so much more to the Max Ivey story.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I have similar experience, except I don't have a built-in excuse. So, I talk to people all day who have stories much harder than mine, who have circumstances or backgrounds with lots more baggage than me, yet they've been able to do so much more. So it's inspiring and humbling at the same time of like, Justin, what's your excuse? You know what I mean? So I love it though. So it's a good exercise. And I would recommend it to anyone out there to kind of take that same mindset of like, you know what, these people are doing amazing, amazing things. So why can't I?
Right. And that may be a humility exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Watch podcasts where they interview people who have overcome serious adversity, or maybe start your own podcast. Or if you don't want to go all in with a podcast, start reaching out to people directly and going, hey, I seen you online and you have an amazing story. I want to know if we can have a virtual cup of coffee.
Yeah. I wanted to kind of pop back a little bit. So when you were describing your tactic with generating an email list, right?
Yeah.
You provided free link building for them and said, hey, I'm promoting you for free. I just want you to open up my email. I kind of wanted to dissect that process because I find that very interesting. As you've mentioned, you are very willing to do creative solutions. And I want to, like I said, dissect that process because I think it's valuable for our listeners. So from what I saw, you, as you said, you were curious about a problem. You asked yourself how. And then you said, how can I do this? How can I do something that's valuable to them, but that's free for me and relatively easy? So at that point, I see that you are setting parameters for yourself. So it's not just like, how can I do this? But it's much more focused. And then from there, you start kind of crossing off the ones that aren't win-win solutions. So I think that's very fascinating. Is that process just natural for you, or is something that you practiced in your days in the carnival business? Or tell us kind of how you started learning how to do stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that the practice itself is natural, but it's natural because I've been doing it for years, and I've also been watching and listening to other people do it for years. I had the benefit of some great teachers online who challenged me to come up with different solutions and helped me to understand that while it seems like the carnival world and the blogging world are, night and day, if not maybe the sun and Pluto, to understand that I could use some of these things if I just thought about them in a different way. So yeah, it was practice over the years. And so I would say something that might help our listeners would be to observe other people who are problem solvers. I'm sure you probably know somebody in your workplace who whenever there's an unusual, difficult mess to fix, they'll go to that person. So you might want to reach out to them. There might be somebody you're following online who seems like they have the ability to find, weird ways to get from point A to point C, and just exposing yourself more, and really just trying on a daily basis to see your surroundings in a more analytical, different way. I think that a lot of times we just don't pay attention when things are being presented to us. So in some cases, you really have to have that outside person who will help you to see some potential solutions, or even help you see the ability within yourself to find and manage the solution. I mentioned earlier, I have this wonderful friend. Her name is Adrienne Smith. I refer to her as my blogging mama. When I met her, she was known as the blog commenting rock star of the internet. And since she's transitioned to a different business, but she taught me everything I know about building relationships online, blog commenting, relationship marketing. And she was one of those people who saw much more inside me than I did. And as I started to have confidence in the fact that I was more than a carny or more than a broker, that also freed me up to see some of these unusual solutions. So I would say it's practice, it's watching other people that do it, and it's finding a mentor or a really close friend who can help you see the possibilities in yourself, help you see yourself as maybe a little more than you think you are, and give you that confidence that will help you, take the risk and think, well, this isn't the way I want to do it. This isn't the way everybody else is doing it, but this seems right to me. That's what I work. And I think I have a good example in this area. A few years ago, I was having difficulty uploading my audio to the hosting platform I was using at that time. There were some accessibility problems because of my screen reader. And so I was really starting to lose my joy for having conversations and sharing them on my podcast. And eventually I sat down and said, okay, Max, you love having conversations. You don't want to stop having conversations, but they don't do anybody any good if they don't make it out into the world where people can hear them. I said, so who says that a podcast has to be audio only, or has to be video and audio and text? So what I decided to do is I said, okay, until things change, I'm just going to upload the video, which I was recording both on Zoom anyway, and I had it sitting on my laptop doing nothing. I said, I'm going to upload the video to Facebook and YouTube because those are easy platforms. I don't like Facebook, but it's easier than podcast hosting platforms, most of them.
Yeah.
So I said, well, I'm just going to upload the video. So I did that for a year and a half, 2 years. And then I went and spoke at a conference in Kansas for people, visually impaired people who are about to enter the job world or about to go off to college. And I taught them how to tie a tie and how to shave and some other things that most people consider basic. But while I was there, I was listening to these kids and I was seeing the things they were being exposed to in the STEM arena. And these kids were wanting to go into culinary arts, into aviation design, into aerospace, electrical engineering, just so many. And they did real world actual projects during that week. And at the end of the week, these kids are telling me how I changed their lives. And I'm thinking, no, y'all changed mine because y'all showed me that Max was making excuses as far as his podcast. And I went home and I started doing some research, and eventually I found out that Blubbery has a very accessible platform, not only for uploading your audio, but for embedding the audio in your blog or your website. So, I got with them, created an account, worked with their tech people to make sure I had it all set up right. And then July 1st of last year was 19. Yeah, July 1st of last year, I went back online on Apple and Stitcher and the other podcast players. So sometimes the creative solution comes when you think, okay, am I doing this because I should do it because everybody else is doing it? Or am I doing it because it serves my purposes of getting me in my particular personal situation to the next step on my path?
Yeah. It kind of goes back to that conversation we were having about traditional and finding the merits of doing something because it's traditional and then realizing that, hey, these circumstances aren't necessarily traditional, so maybe it needs a non-traditional solution to fit them. And I also think, like you said, probably one of the best things I've heard on this podcast over and over and over again is just the simple fact of seeing other examples of people doing what you want to do. Because I feel like, in a way, that kind of breaks the mental limits that we set on ourselves and say, like, oh, it is possible, and that changes our expectations of reality and of ourselves. And it kind of propels us forward, because instead of us fighting against ourselves and our own limits, we're now only fighting against whatever else is outside of us, and we're kind of working as a team within ourselves.
Right. I agree with that. And I would just make one caution in that area is some people, they want to watch other people who have done it or are doing it, but sometimes they get intimidated or overwhelmed because the person they're using as an example is so much farther along on their journey than you are on yours. So I would say when you're looking for people to model, maybe Gary Vee is not the guy you want to model on day one,
Yeah.
Maybe John Lee Dumas is not the guy you want to model on day one. He is a great example of podcasting, especially when you find out more about his backstory. But, maybe you don't want to model Gretchen Rubin or Elizabeth Gilbert on day one. They're great to follow and be inspired by. But, it also helps if you can find examples from people who are, maybe just only a few rungs up the ladder, farther up the ladder than you are. And, the other thing, we're talking about seeing other people do it. One thing I am a big believer in is asking for help and accepting help when offered. And then, of course, being grateful for either. And it applies to opportunities as well as for information and direct assistance. And so what I like to tell people is when you refuse to ask, you rob the other person of the joy they would have received from helping you. So one, think about how good you feel when you do something for somebody else who can do nothing or will do nothing but say thank you. And sometimes maybe they don't want you to say thank you. They'll just smile or wave or shake their head, but they acknowledge so remember, think about how good that makes you feel. So then look at it from the other side. You're talking to somebody who is an expert in their field. They've spent years perfecting a skill, honing an ability, learning the information around a particular industry or a particular activity. They are the expert, and they've spent a lot of time becoming the expert or becoming really good at something. Just imagine how good they're going to feel if you come along and say, hey, I know that you know this stuff. I know that you're, one of the best in the world at this, maybe even. I'm struggling. Would you please help me so that I can progress and become a better person or have a better business? So just imagine, how this is going to make somebody feel, because a lot of these people go all day and nobody ever asks them for their advice or their help. And it's like, man, so it's one of those things. You're actually making somebody else's day harder by not asking. And I like to try to get that into people's heads because, it comes down to ego. People are afraid to ask because they think it's going to make them look bad, inept, stupid, ignorant. We have this whole mindset that if we can't do it by ourselves, that we're a failure. And of course, that's absolutely not true. However, it is a big myth, especially in the online world where you see faces of brands or faces of blogs and websites, and people assume that person's doing it all by themselves. Well, if they're making you think they're doing it all by themselves, they are lying out their butt to you. So, we are not meant to do big things by ourselves. And if we will allow other people to help, or if we'll ask them to help, we can get there more quickly. So you have to take the focus off yourself and think about the other person. And like I say, if you refuse to ask, you rob the other person of the joy they would have received from helping you. And people are like, okay, Max, but how do we ask? Okay, I'll help you with that too. What you do is you figure out who you want to ask. And nowadays we're really lucky because we have social media. So if you can find them on Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn, what you do is first you follow them, then you share their content, then you leave a comment and tell them how great that last article was. Or if you really think their last post was garbage, then tell them that you're not really happy with their last post, but give them a sound argument as to why. Sometimes a comment where you point out something about their ideas that just doesn't sit right with you, sometimes those get your respect more than the fawning. So you leave a comment, you share their work, then you reach out and you send an email or direct message saying, hey, I really like what you're doing, and please let me know if there's anything I could ever do to help you. And so you do that, and then you wait a while, and assuming they're right back to you, and you start a conversation, and then you go, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is where I want to go. This is why I need to get this done. And you are the recognized expert, so I would really appreciate it if you would help me. Now, they're not always going to say yes. Most of the time they will. I have very rarely been told no. But, sometimes when they say yes, they're going to want stuff in return. They may want you to pay them a fee, but that fee may be less than they would usually charge you. They may want you to write a blog post or to send out something to your email list. They may ask you to do something in return for their help. And I'm perfectly fine with it. I once talked to a real estate agent who said, Max, if you ask somebody who's an expert to help, you better be prepared to either spend a lot of money or work your butt off in return. So I'm good with that. So that's the process of asking for help. And in most cases, as I'm sure Justin is going to agree with me as a podcast host, how many times have you reached out to somebody and asked them to come on your podcast and they told you, no, thank you, ain't going to happen?
Yeah. It's tough.
So most of the time, if you ask in a proper manner with sincerity and humility, people are going to want to help you. They're going to say yes. It happens a lot. And it doesn't just happen to me because I'm the blind guy on the internet. It happens to me because I've got a long history of asking for things, to the point where recently a good friend introduced me to one of her friends on LinkedIn, and her introductory email on LinkedIn was, this is Max Ivey. He is a really nice guy. He's blind. He's always doing something amazing. And he usually has something that he needs to ask for. I don't know what it is he wants, but I guarantee you it'll be interesting. That was a recent introduction. And of course I laughed at it. I thought it was really cool.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the person she introduced me to still hasn't replied to my email, although I wrote very clearly that I didn't want anything from her. Which reminds me of another thing. Recently, I had an exchange with somebody from Bugatti online, and we were talking back and forth. And he's like, no driverless, because that isn't our brand. I said, well, someday maybe I'll get somebody to take me for a ride in one. And he mistakenly thought I was asking for a media test drive. And I'm like, man, I don't even write in that field. Why would I expect something? So I had to write back to him and explain, hey, I wasn't asking, I wasn't hinting, I wasn't wheedling. If I wanted something from you, I'd ask straight up, man, Mm-hmm. But people sometimes assume that because I have a history, a practice, experience. And when it comes to asking for help, that's something you have to develop over time. So just like finding creative solutions, sometimes it's, how do I get my car started, or how do I get out of the driveway when somebody else has got me blocked in? Do I ask them to move? Do I try to sneak around? It can be little things that you start with at first. And then eventually, when you need to make a real big mental, emotional, or a spiritual leap for business purposes, or even in your personal life, then you've got that history of finding solutions built up. I have, and that's the one thing I like to tell people. There's a lot of self-help gurus out there who talk about affirmations and law of attraction and finding the positive and all these different things. But you know what most of them don't talk about? They don't talk about how it takes practice. Mm-hmm. You cannot use affirmations today for, your car braking. That just doesn't work. You have to use them over time so that when something bad happens, you're ready for it. Same with finding the positive. You have to make it a habit and do it every day, do it all the time, so that when something really bad happens, you have experience. So I would say practice finding solutions, practice finding the positive, practice asking for help, practice with small things and build up to bigger things. Try to create a friendship, an acquaintance with the person before you ask them, so that they don't think you met them just to ask them for something. Yeah, you can laugh at me if you want to, but hey, it's how I got from there to here. It's how I'm going to get from here to the next place, Mm-hmm. So some people on Twitter, there's even an ask number 4U hashtag some people use. So Max will hashtag ask for you, because that's one of the things I do in my business is reach out to people for creative entrepreneurs. But I need, before we run on too long, because I think the clock is starting to get us.
Yeah.
I want to speak to the graduate level of asking for help because this is really important. Okay. This is a lot of people can build up to asking for help, but the harder part is when somebody comes along and offers to help you that you don't remember asking. Because when that happens, ego really gets offended. It's like, who the heck do you think you are? I don't need your help. I'm doing perfectly fine here. Why don't you take your time and go help somebody who needs it? That's what happens when people offer to help you. But here's the thing you have to remember. One, it took them more courage to offer to help you than it would have taken you to ask them. Mm-hmm. So courage and faith is involved. And when you say no, especially if you say no in an offended way, you're making it harder for that person to offer to help the next person who really needs their help. So that's the one thing to remember first off. Then beyond that, we ask for things in a lot of different ways without calling them asking. So most people, when I say ask for help, they're thinking a phone call, a text message, an email, or a direct message. That's what they're thinking. Mm-hmm. But it also includes prayer, meditation. It includes the law of attraction. It includes vision boards. And the other thing it includes is there are people out there that either know you or have known your work for a long time who will see messages in what you say that you did not write because you didn't do them consciously. They will notice things that you are struggling with in the language you use, the verb tenses you use, the pronouns you use, the positive and negative adjectives that they use. Some people, they get to know your work, even if they don't know you, and they will go, he's having trouble with something. And I think I know what it is. I'm going to reach out to him and offer to help. The other thing is there are people who are intuitive. They are naturally gifted in a way that allows them to notice things other people just go right on past. And when they notice somebody that feel that you have pain, they will reach out to you and offer to help you. And the other thing is we have those people who they will see your work and they will look at the product or the results and they'll think, this is pretty good, but I think I have an idea that will make it even better. And so, sometimes you have to look at those people. And of course, there's the natural skepticism. Why does this person want to help me? Are they out to get something from me? Are they going to ask for my credit card information at some point? Why are they helping me? In a lot of cases, they're helping you out of just the sheer desire to want to help another person mm-hmm. who could do nothing but say thank you. Sometimes they're just wanting to build relationships, not knowing what the future will bring them. I do that a lot myself. And, sometimes they will eventually want you to help them do something in return, or they'll want to use what they did to help you as a testimonial or some way to promote themselves down the road. Those are reasons people do it. But for the most part, it's usually because they want to help somebody else that they see is struggling. And then the last little piece of this puzzle is when people do stuff for you, whether you asked or whether they offered to help, is you have to show proper gratitude, which can be just saying thank you, sending them an email, card, maybe you send them some cookies from one of them online places. You mention them in your social media posts, you give them a testimonial. But the most important way to show gratitude is to use their advice. If they helped you with a solution, use the solution. Don't, basically slap them in the face by saying, thanks, that was a great idea. And then going on and doing it the way you were doing it anyway. So right. Action is a big form of gratitude, in my opinion, because the way I look at life, inspiration without action is meaningless.
Yeah. Wow. That was awesome. I especially liked your formula for reaching out, your quick steps. Obviously, it's probably a little bit more nuanced than that in actual practice, but the follow, share, comment, reach out, and offer, that seems like super applicable. But thank you so much, Maxwell, for being on the show. We're actually coming down. I don't want to take up too much of your time, and I actually got to get going too. But before we go, how can our audience reach out to you, see what you're up to, and support you?
Right. They can go to theblindblogger.net, or they can send me an email at justask@theblindblogger.net. My podcast, the What's Your Excuse show, is on all the major players, and you can also ask Alexa or Google to play What's Your Excuse. If they want to support me or reach out to me, or maybe they've got some help they want to offer me so I can follow my own advice here, they can send an email to justask@theblindblogger.net. Again, the website is theblindblogger.net. I'm active on all the most of the social media networks. And one thing I need to mention about social media, as a blind person using a screen reader, social media goes by really fast, especially Twitter and Instagram. So if we're friends on social media and you post something and you wonder, well, why hasn't Max commented? It's because Max didn't see it. So be sure and tag Max on social media so that Max gets one of those handy dandy alert messages that says, hey, Justin just posted this great interview from the person that was on the podcast after you, and you need to share it. So I'm on all the major social media platforms, whether it's email or online. I love meeting new people because I never know where those connections and opportunities are going to lead. And I don't give out my email lightly. I honestly believe people need to have at least one person they can reach out to who will listen, because quite often when we go to change our business or our lives, most of the people that we know are not comfortable with that and not supportive. So I do my best to be that friendly ear to those people who are brave enough to send me an email. And again, theblindblogger.net. And you don't have to want to buy from me, hire me, or book me to speak in order to talk to me.
Excellent. I will get all those up in the show notes. But as far as action items go, I came up with 3. Let me know what you think of these. And if you want to add more, we can do that. The first one was to try some of the humility exercises we were talking about and to maybe investigate some of their own. Second one was to observe problem solvers like we talked about. And then the last one was to try your reach out formula of follow, share, comment, reach out, and offer. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we did really good. I think we also need to add in there that when you don't ask, you're robbing the other person of their joy, making their lives more difficult. And the one thing that's gotten me here is something my daddy taught me, which is very simple and very short and very easy to remember, and is available on t-shirts from my website. If you don't ask, they can't say yes.
I love it. Awesome. I'll put that as the 4th action item, but thank you so much, Maxwell, for being on the show. I've appreciated it. And thanks for, working with me and all the snafus I've created, but you gave...
It's all great. Hey, just let me say one more thing, Justin, because this is really important to me and it should be important to anybody that goes on a podcast. I truly appreciate the time, effort, and money that you put into doing this show because honestly, truthfully, sincerely, I don't say this just for BS reasons. Without people like you giving me the opportunity to share my story, there would not have been The Blind Blogger. There would not be a No Excuses or What's Your Excuse. So really, without you, I wouldn't be where I am now, or without you and other great people like you. So thank you sincerely, my friend.
It's my pleasure. Like I said, I've really enjoyed having you on the show, and I think this conversation is going to help a lot of people hopefully ask for help, but a lot of people hopefully also humble themselves and just build connections. So I think it's super valuable. So thanks again.
Well, thank you again. I agree with you completely, and I look forward to seeing. Hopefully, we will hear from at least one person that we've helped take a step.
Agreed. Whew! What a great episode. Thank you again, Maxwell, for coming on the show. To all my listeners out there, I would ask you humbly and peacefully and with all the love in my dear little heart, go reach out to Maxwell. Follow him on Instagram, social media, all the places, and make sure you share some love with him and tell him how much you loved the show. I know that him coming on the show helped a lot of you, and so just go and return the favor. Tell him how much it meant to you. I'd like to re-emphasize some things that he said. Again, don't be afraid to ask people for help. Obviously, be aware of the costs that might come with it, but if you're asking someone for help on social media, before you even ask for help, start building that relationship. Make sure you like their stuff. Make sure you share it. Make sure you help them out at least a little bit before you ask them. And then make sure you kind of temper your ask. Don't just say, hey, can you give me $1 million? Because that's kind of stupid, right? Make sure your ask is very well thought out, and make it as easy as possible for them. But again, thank you guys so much for listening to the show. I'd like to invite you guys to do hard things. But before I do that, let me just thank you for being here with me, being on this journey. listening to the podcast. Thank you for coming back every single week. I couldn't do this without you. Honestly, this podcast would be nowhere if no one listened to it. So the fact that you're here, the fact that you leave ratings and reviews, the fact that you share the show with other people, the fact that you reach out to me on Facebook, Instagram, at the Hard Thing Podcast, I appreciate all of that. I'm very grateful for each and every one of you. And I want each and every one of you to succeed. I want you to be where you want to be and to do the hard things. And hopefully, I'd like to help you do those hard things. I'd like to help you accomplish those goals and face those challenges that are standing in between you and where you want to be. So if you need help in any way, I have resources that are limited, but maybe I can help in some way. Reach out to me. Until next week, guys, keep doing hard things because you will overcome average. Is everyone else gone? Awesome. Okay, this is a bonus little thing for just the uber awesome special listeners that you guys are for listening all the way to the end of the podcast show. A lot of people don't do that, surprisingly. But just because you guys are maybe super fans, I don't know if you are or not, but you listen to the end of the show, so I'll consider you super fans. Maxwell Ivey was so awesome that he actually did something a little special. So he provided it so that way we could do a drawing for listeners of the Hard Thing Podcast. One of you will win a t-shirt, a Hard Thing Podcast t-shirt sent directly to your home. So the way to enter into this, and this is a secret raffle. So if you guys don't do it, I get the t-shirt. So all you got to do is go to the Hard Thing Podcast, and there's going to be a post, kind of an audiogram with Maxwell Ivey. All you got to do is like that, and then in the comments, tag 2 friends, and then you'll be entered in to win this t-shirt. Again, don't tell anyone. I guess you'll tell your friends, but actually no, don't tell anyone because I'm not going to put it in the post. Only people who listen to this actual extra bit will know about the secret giveaway. So again, don't tell anyone, whisper it in here close. But thanks again, guys, for being super listeners of the Hard Thing Podcast. Hopefully you win the Hard Thing Podcast t-shirt brought to you by Maxwell Ivey. Thanks, Maxwell.